In that case, would it be all right if I record as well?
Of course, of course.
Okay, amazing.
We work openly here. I know I like publishing everything so that people who are just looking at this, they see if I don't report, they can see, oh, I'm actually in these meetings and stuff like that. So it helps in the communications. I think it's useful
Okay.
because a lot of times we talk about a lot of useful points, right? So yeah, it's
Yeah,
useful.
for
Hmm.
sure. Amazing. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great.
Now
Um,
we're gonna get
yeah.
into Wired too, like if you can do that later. But I mean, do you get the story? Like, the thing is, um, like with the Wired article, which we were working on, you proposed before. It's like right now we're in this major transition, right? And I think we're actually saving that for later because the stories we can do, the thing that I'm not satisfied with at this point is the amount of replication of enterprise, also known as zero. So until that improves and people are really getting livelihoods out of this, I mean, there's nothing new since a decade ago. But now that's going to change in a major way, right? So we're starting the apprenticeship program, and people, like for example, the one lady is applying, says, yeah, how quick can I learn to be a construction manager so I can start running crews? And that's called enterprise and livelihood. So that's what I'm saying. But it will take off, like after this apprenticeship. It's going to get very, very interesting because we're building the homes, and people are actually getting jobs. So
For sure. Yeah, yeah. No, I think with yeah, to your point, like I think with the Wired article when I was pitching with the manager, not my manager, my editor, full
uh-huh.
transparency was sort of like they really liked the story, but they sort of needed like more adoptions, exactly to your
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
Like they needed like the third act to like the two preceding acts. With this article, I think I repitched it a little bit and like shuffled around a couple of ideas. I'm
Mm-hmm.
actually interested in, I guess, the premise of this to start off our conversation is to kind of capture the evolution of your project,
Mm-hmm.
more specifically like your relationship with open source technology. So
Mm-hmm.
some open source ecology, and like from our previous conversation, it seemed like the end goal of like all of this is that like because everything is open source and because everything
Mm-hmm.
is publicly available, like anyone can replicate this in however way they want,
Yeah.
right? So I'm curious to sort of learn a little bit more about like how your project and your relationship with like the concept of open
Mm-hmm.
source technology or just like open source in general
Yeah.
has evolved alongside like the socio-political landscape, has evolved aside like developments in technology, and just like because it's been like you said, I think like almost a decade, if not more, that you've been working on this.
Mm-hmm.
I think tracking the evolution of your project would be
Yeah.
really interesting.
Okay. So that big question, start with that.
Yeah, I guess
Okay.
like the biggest like maybe perhaps we can start with a smaller question because that was sort of like the
Yeah,
overall
that,
theme.
that's a big question. I can go on that, but yeah, maybe go
Okay.
ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, maybe we can just start there and then we can
Okay. Okay.
dive
So
into more specific
what
questions.
was the initial vision? 50 machines that allow you to run a modern civilization from scratch, and that was to address, I'm out there getting out of grad school and started a farm in Missouri, and then my tractor broke, and I was broke, you know, paid to get it repaired. Then it broke again. I was broke too pretty soon. I recognized that, yes, you need tools, skills to make this work. And the off the shelf options there were not any good, right? Over this time, so this is almost 2 decades later, I can tell you very clearly why that is why that is so important. I mean, it's what I actually defined as, like a couple of weeks ago. I coined this term called treadmill ROI, like the return on investment. So say you buy a tractor, and uh, the farmers spend like $500,000 on a tractor. Even they have to now, pretty much the machine in some way owns them. They don't own it. They have huge bills to pay to repay that machine. And 5 to 10 years, like 5 years is a usual depreciation lifetime, they have to buy another one. That's called being on a treadmill. It's just like the rest of society. Why isn't our quality of life getting to the point where we don't have to do any work at all? Zero marginal cost society, right? Jeremy Rifkin talks about that. Well, that's far from reality right now. There's huge inefficiencies. things like the machines breaking, that's part of it. But altogether, the lack of lifetime design. You don't have lifetime design equipment or anything. There's a lot of still a lot of scarcity-based thinking that, oh, I can only succeed if someone else, I take from others, as opposed to the abundance mindset. So, okay, we started a couple of decades ago on that notion, but right now the notion is much, I think, much more clear. At that time, I was not talking about, like commercial product release, meaning you're competing with that Bobcat skid steer or that Haas CNC milling machine or whatever else you got, or that Kubota diesel engine or something, actually making it from scratch. At that time it was like, yeah, let's just make the access to these tools open, reduce the price, and use off-the-shelf components and do that. I think it gets a little deeper right now because it turned into much more of a whole product ecology of what is the entire technosphere built of, so that you can build the parts yourself and go as deep as you need into the technological tool chain to make it happen. I think the main shift, I mean, that was still an original idea. We have, okay, you have got production machines, you got machines that make machines, and you've got machines that make materials. And that's pretty much the entire first and second sectors of the economy. Meaning, first sector is mining and agriculture, like primary resources. Second sector is manufacturing, right? So that aimed to cover all of that. Great. Right now, the only difference is that I recognize how much rigor that is. Like to take to the final productization, that from the 90 or 99% when it's still like a prototype versus a turnkey product, that is the big deal. And that is what we have achieved with the house. So right now it's on the market, right? We're selling it. It's absolutely documented. We're just finally filing for the OSHWA certification, the Open Source Hardware Association of certification of an open source product, right? It's production ready. You want to start a business with it? Here's absolute complete blueprints, instructions, bills of materials to make that real, including enterprise know-how. Everything that we know, we publish about it. So I remember one time Isaiah Saxon, who he did he helped out with a TED Talk. He did our really nice initial video called The Global Village Construction Set in 2 minutes. This was back like 2009 or 10, something like that. And then I ended up visiting him after the TED Talk, during the TED Talk time, and we were talking about, okay, I want to use this on my farm. They have a little sustainable agriculture thing going on at their location, just to feed their community. And I was like, yeah. And the discussion was around, okay, so how do I get a copy of this tractor? How, am I actually going to produce that, right, for people, for a market? Because initially it was a lot about, okay, here's the blueprints, go wild and enterprise. Yes, enterprise, go forth across the world. But it doesn't happen like that. So at that time, while I was thinking, okay, tractor, am I going to actually manufacture that? I was like, nah, I mean, this is more like, okay, we got these open source blueprints. We use these tractors, right? You can too, just download it and build it yourself. But what we found out is since that time, since that decade of getting on a world stage, nothing has happened in terms of enterprise replication. So therefore the question is, what does it take to go to the next step, right? And that's the main difference in the approach right now, being extremely clear that, hey, for each product, it's going to take about $1 million to develop it to commercial grade product release. Now that's actually quite cheap. We're still talking about open source collaborative methods to use to get there. But we're talking about a $50 million budget over the next 4 years by 2028. So 2008 is when I coined the term Global Village Construction Set. And at the 10-year mark in 2018, I said, damn it, we're going to have to finish this puppy someday. So I made a promise to the world saying 10 more years, 2028. And I'm keeping to that. And we're getting there. And the way we're getting to it is starting the school with apprenticeships where we teach the integrated school skill sets for basically become a civilization builder. You know, that style. So we're actually aiming for that still. And how do you? Okay, 50 million. Okay, that's a hard sell to a foundation, right? What do we do? There may be a little bit of foundation support. We actually just got a promise, a recommendation for further 750K over the next 3 years from Novo Foundation. So there's a little bit of money coming in. But the real deal is actually the bootstrap production, which can scale this far and wide. So the real economics are making 100K per house that we sell. So we know how to build and sell a house that can make 50 to 100K under regular market conditions, and scaling that kind of effort where we actually build the homes as part of the apprenticeship. So it's self-funding, and then scaling these builds. For example, if the first person that we teach to become a construction manager, if you run a turnkey business like that, running crews of 24 people, now note the milestone here is 5 days. That is real. We haven't proven it as the full production build house. We never had a crew of 24. We have shown things like, here's 50 people coming to a workshop to build this house that I'm in right now.
So sorry to clarify. I want to make sure I get this correct. You're saying there is funding from what is the name of the organization that you said? What
There's
foundation?
funding, but that kind of funding it's called Novo Foundation.
Is it Novel, like Novo?
Novo. It's one of the
Uh,
Buffett's sons' foundations.
Okay.
Um, okay, but my point about that is
No,
really
no, for
no.
sure. I'm just making sure I get the facts straight if I were to
Yes,
quote that.
yes,
And
Novo.
yeah, so with the Bootstrap Foundation, you mentioned $100,000 per house. And I think from, if I recall correctly from our last conversation, there's a distinction between like the blueprints that you have online public access so that anyone can like gather the materials that they need and then build those houses, right? The 100K per house profit you're talking about that goes straight back into into the program is for the turnkey houses that you are offering the services to build. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay, okay, cool.
Those are
Um,
all open blueprints. Yes.
okay. So the distinction here is that you're like, if I'm getting it, if I'm understanding correctly, is that like over the course of, I guess, the next 3 years, because 2028, you're hoping to
2020.
raise
We're pushing it for yeah, 3 4
you're
years.
hoping to
Yeah.
raise this amount of money through selling the services of building these houses. Is that correct?
That's correct. Right now, because that's the only product we have, the only way we can sell other things is to productize, meaning take to the finished product line on all the other things. Now we've done things like, for example, there's 12 people building a 3D printer over a weekend, right? And that's a workshop that people pay for. So say they paid $300 on top of the materials for that, you got 3,600 revenue. Things like that. We've built brick presses where we build the brick press and a person pays 5K over the bill of materials, making that brick press about 10K. And we keep that 5K as the workshop fee and things like so. So there's revenue models based on workshops. Now that is hard work and not that scalable, because after all, there's only one of the findings over the entire time. One of our shifts was shifting from, in terms of funding, the shifting from what you would call DIY production to turnkey production. Now, doesn't mean we are giving up anything of the former. It's just a recognition that any people that will build anything themselves currently in the population are maybe 1%. It's a fringe market, and that's the market we've been operating in. So, for example, selling these houses, they're just up on an open market. That's 100% of the population that can benefit from it. So there's that shift there.
For sure. Okay, that's wonderful. I want to kind of double click into a little bit. So you talked a lot about like the changing models and kind of what you're realizing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you talked a lot about enterprise and enterprise
Yeah.
like replication. Can
Mm-hmm.
you tell me? So my understanding of enterprise is kind of like a financial, like it's like a financial term. Like, how can you define what you mean by like enterprise and livelihood, um, in the way that you're using it?
Yeah, what's enterprise in a way we're looking at it? It's something that's competitive with the alternatives you have in the mainstream. And mainstream, well, yeah, mainstream, while we transform the mainstream to not only sustainable, don't be sustainable, be regenerative, right? So not only to sustainable, but to regenerative. Um, Enterprise is basically that which is associated with a proprietary grouping of people who typically get patents and things like that, or various protection mechanisms to run their enterprise because they're afraid that somebody's going to steal it. So we're our notion of enterprise is radically open collaborative enterprise, meaning that we publish the blueprints for the product and for the enterprise itself. What's it mean? That means you've got, for example, on a house model, a construction manager with 24 trained people can produce 50 of these houses per year. Okay, that's 5 million net. So that's an enterprise. That's solid earnings. You can keep that enterprise. You have plenty of room for growth. You're an exponentially expanding organization if you can do that.
So,
So
sorry, if you're
yeah.
using the term enterprise in the context of it being like in the more literal sense of it being an enterprise, and you're talking about
Yeah.
enterprise like replication, what I guess I'm personally getting a little confused by,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe I'm just misinterpreting, would love your clarification on, is like, do you sort of imagine replications of like right now you're the person in charge of selling these turnkey houses, you're the person running these workshops, and you're the person running this singular enterprise
Yeah.
personally that is open
Yeah.
and collaborative, right?
Yeah.
And that's how you're generating money
Yeah.
to feed back into your apprenticeship program. But when you want enterprise replications, what do you mean? Do you
Yeah.
want other people to also be doing this and also making money off of it?
Yes, absolutely. But
Okay.
let's break that down a little bit. So what is the enterprise? We don't have it. We don't have it yet. We know we have proven the concept that we can build a house and sell it with good margins. Now the real proof of that enterprise, so that's product level. So that's product open source. That product is open source, including open source economic model, which says, okay, here's your build costs, here's your labor costs, material costs, and here's what you sell at the end, and here's how you organize the build process and all that. That's there. Now, when I say enterprise, well, anyone can take our know-how right now and run with it. They have to have a learning curve, right? But when I say enterprise, the more sweet thing is now we're actually taking it to what you might call a replicable, scalable enterprise or franchise. So the enterprise actually means more about open source franchise. What's that mean? So franchise means that something that is clearly a winner with a very clear pathway to getting there, to running this operation. So for us, that means 24 people and a construction manager producing 50 houses a year. We haven't done that yet. We've built one house that's currently on the market, right? So at the point in about a year, or yeah, I guess a year, when we can actually do one of the 5 days builds, what we can do is take one of our people who are trained to be a construction manager now and then run that operation and then demonstrate that, oh, I'm building me 50 houses a year. Proven. Okay, so we have to, what we do is we prove that, and as a result of that, people say, wow, this actually works. And then they
Mm-hmm.
replicate.
For
Um,
sure.
so, but replicate, so there's all levels of enterprise, meaning like small builder, small contractor right now can take our plans, can use our techniques, they can start an enterprise. Okay, that's enterprise maybe level, the ground level. The what I call like the core enterprise model that I consider right now is that a construction manager running crews of 24,
For sure. Okay, cool.
and
That's
nobody
good
in the
to know.
world does that. That's
Okay.
nobody builds houses in a 5 day time scale.
Okay, that's good to know. I guess like I'm curious to zoom in a little bit
Mm.
on um the term open source itself.
Mm-hmm.
So we're using it a lot in like maybe I'll just like throw out my understanding. Open source is like you have information online, other people can contribute to this information,
Mm-hmm.
other people can interpret or use this information for whatever
Mm-hmm.
purposes they choose to. And in your case, it's beneficial because like you said, in the beginning of your journey of this like GVCS, like open source ecology journey, it was about like, okay, maybe like farmers can fix their own tractors, or farmers can build their own things that would like build
Hmm.
their own tractors if they want to.
Yeah.
How's the definition of open source, or like how you see this, like the definition of open source that I've just presented to you,
Yeah. You.
change over the course of the
No, the
decade that you?
definition of open source has been the same, and it's been defined in somewhere around, I guess, 2011 or 20, early 2000s. An official definition of open source hardware came about from the Open Source Hardware Association. Our meaning of that has not changed in any way whatsoever. In fact, we're actually we would actually propose that um, the thing you missed, to answer the immediate question, is you missed the enterprise aspect of it. So you're able to use, modify, contribute to, and enterprise it. So if the thing is open source, it is not open source unless somebody can actually use it for free, like with a license that allows commercial use. That's one of the four freedoms of open source. So that's the clarity. Now, just kind of like geeking out on the concept of open source, there's an element of open source that throughout the years we observed that sucks, and that is open source does not require any collaboration. Actually, there's nothing. Well, I mean, let me explain what I mean by that. I mean, it seems like you collaborate, right? Okay, so you contribute to an open project, right? But it can be done in a fashion where there's a bunch of people running into a corner, doing their work, and contributing into an open pool. They can be complete autistic sociopaths and interact with nobody outside of pushing it to the common pool, right? So, in that sense, we find this missing element of the collaboration aspect because, for example, open source does not require you to have an open process of development. Open source hardware or open source software. It does not require you to make that process open. It allows you to do things like, oh, you just go off in a corner in quite a secret environment, not secret, but that kind of environment, and you're not really collaborating. And that's, in our work, we found how important, I guess we emphasize the open collaborative part much more because the open source definition, it implies collaboration, but in practice, it does not mean that open collaboration actually happens because of the way it's executed. It's people running into a corner and they really do not interact with anybody or anything like that. There is no aspect or mechanism within the open source method that says, oh, you actually have to collaborate. I mean, it's all best practices, but I feel that this is somewhat more of a rant from somebody who's been in the field for a long time, but my rant about it is that a lot of open source is not collaborative, right? So, and then there's a lot of people who are using the word open source right now, like Tesla, for example, the Tesla car, that call it open source, but it's nothing, has nothing to do with open source. Like, you cannot replicate it because of practical issues or things like that. There's many trade secrets around it or supply chains that you cannot access. That does not really meet the definition of open source, right? So there's a lot of people certainly misuse that word to make it seem like it's open-ish and for publicity, for PR and good wish from the rest of society, but who are simply abusing that word. So there's a bunch of articles actually on it. If you're interested in delving into this, there's like 5 levels of open source. There's a distinction between strategic open source, fake open source, and like useful open source. There's all these distinctions you can make in the field to make the best of this method. Because one of the things to comment about the whole evolution of our work in this is that open source hardware, the promise of that has not been delivered. I mean, the initial promise was, oh, abundance, everything becomes zero marginal cost, literally. I mean, that's kind of the, if you abstract the sense of what what people were promising, they're promising the concept of zero marginal cost society, I would say. That's one way to look at it. That is so far from the truth. Like, things are more expensive, houses are going up in price. There's a lot of competitive waste that makes a lot of things much more expensive. You can think about things like the housing crisis, the health care crisis, and the what I mentioned was the treadmill ROI when you buy heavy equipment and then it lasts only 5 years and you have to buy it again, and the ROI is ridiculously low. Like I actually looked up skid steer ROI for a tracked skid steer with a construction machine. The ROI is 2 over lifetime. 2. 2 is bad. You buy this machine, then you're forced to like go after expensive customers, jack your prices up, and then you have to repeat the cycle in 5 years as you got to buy the next machine, like a skid steer for 75K.
For sure.
That
Can
is
you tell
not
me
sustainable.
For sure. Can you tell me, like, you're saying that open collaboration doesn't happen in the contemporary, like, definition of open source, like, aside from, like, all the nuances of, like, different types of open
Yeah,
source. Could you tell me a little
yeah,
bit, you've mentioned this before, but I'm curious about what you think in this specific context, like,
yeah.
where this open collaboration comes in. Is it sort of the idea that in the exchange of ideas, like, more innovation happens? Like, what
I
is,
think,
like, the
yeah,
crux collaboration?
I think the real missing element is in a true open collaboration. There's a coordination aspect that is missing, and that's why I call it collaboration, like collaboration architecture and collaborative literacy, right? The thing that's missing is, let me give you one example. Like there's going to be like hundreds, thousands of open source like CNC machine projects out there. How many of them are actually collaborating to make a good machine? They don't. They all are in their little corner. They're all developing their thing. There's no coordination. They make a crappy thing, and I know of one that may be classified as commercial grade, like say for a 3D printer, like Voron. I would call it like commercial grade minus the production engineering, but Voron 3D printer is a great printer, for example. Um, but think about the thousands of iterations and other ones that remain as pretty much hobby level. So when I talk about the collaboration, there's a missing element of the economic ended collaboration. Like there's a goal of a real product coming out the pipeline. That part is missing. That's kind of what I mean by the collaboration. And if somebody in an open source world hears me saying this right now, they're probably saying, no, I mean, of course there's plenty of collaboration. We've got open communities, and it's all true. I'm not disputing any of that. But I think the teleology of this, the goal, I think there's a real gap in terms of the actual potential outcome, because the potential outcome is absolute abundance on the material and survival front, which is not the case in the world today, right? Like
How would
there's a lot of
you,
poverty. Gini
for
coefficient is not improving. Gini coefficient is the distribution of wealth measure, things like that. There's real economic issues, and I think open hardware, like just solving the material basis, that's a huge deal for civilization. Like talking about grand evolution of civilization, it should be trivial to survive and make a living today and
for
thrive,
sure,
but it's not.
for sure. I'm curious, like in on the to the point of like an end goal.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking like we've talked a lot about hardware,
Yeah.
and I'm thinking of what you said about the way that like people throw around the term open source in the software ways, and like how I don't know companies like OpenAI or like Meta or whatever are developing like large open source infrastructures that they're hoping like smaller developers would adopt and like so-called collaborate where like individual software people might programmers might be like I'm using the infrastructure that Meta has made public to
Mm-hmm.
everyone and I'm
Yeah.
building my own thing off of it, but
Yeah.
then it's kind of like a bait and switch, right? And then Meta either starts monetizing off of it, Meta starts like changing things, and it becomes the same issue as before, where like big companies are controlling smaller companies or smaller like competitors because like through this open source, like this false promise of open source.
Yeah.
Like, I think in the context of hardware, that's strictly distinct because it's like, because of whatever reason, or do you feel like that also happens in hardware?
Oh well, the thing to say immediately is it doesn't exist. Like who in open source has a goal of actual productization as an explicit goal? There's it's marginal. It's like a small fraction of 1%. It's like 1,000. Last I checked was like 1,000th of 1%. Like the share of actual economic impact of open source hardware is non-existent for practical purposes. Um, Go
So
ahead.
this is specific to hardware.
Um, it is specific to hardware because, for example, in a software, you've got the entire backbone of the internet being open source Linux, right?
For sure, for sure.
So
Okay.
in software, it actually succeeded quite a bit. Now, there's a lot of course, abuse of open source, like people who are doing it, just strategically, just. But the point is that even if you're doing it strategically, like you're trying to get a competitive edge on your competition, right? So you do open source because it makes sense. It's like, oh yeah, people now contribute, your product becomes better. Um, but I think a lot of that is done, philosophically speaking, it's done not because of a belief that we want to share, but the simple belief that it just makes more money, which is true,
Mhm.
right? Now, in hardware, there's a huge limit to that because hardware is much harder, first of all, and second, it's much more tangible to survival for survival needs. I think so. So there's that in hardware. Like when you talk about open sourcing something, whoever's going to get scared, well, what are you going to do? So someone's going to steal your design and make it, and you're going to go out of business. But that's really like this goes back to like the human mindset, the reptilian brain, the flight or fight response, the competitive spirit that makes us afraid really quickly once our livelihood is threatened. It's part of that. It's part of the human psychology. So it's a psychological thing. And uh, yeah, did I answer that or more
Yeah,
questions?
no, for sure. That is really, really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like you're mentioning a lot of really specific and like helpful references,
Mm-hmm.
but for the sake of time, maybe I can follow up like
Yeah.
with some questions on like where those specific sources come
Yeah.
from, and then we can
Sure.
double
Sure.
check them. Okay, amazing. I would love for us to start talking a little bit about this apprenticeship program.
Yeah. Yeah.
Specifically, last time we spoke, you mentioned kind of this grand vision of a
Mm-hmm.
campus
Yeah.
where everything is self-sustaining. There's open collaboration. It's not necessarily insular from the rest of the world. And again, correct me if I'm wrong in this characterization. What I'm curious about, first and foremost, you mentioned kind of economic self-sufficiency, like in this ecosystem. How do you imagine in the North Star, like the completed version
Mm-hmm.
of your
Yeah, let's back
civilization?
up. Yeah,
Yeah.
before we do the apprenticeship, let's back up to the end state of open source hardware. And what that is, first, it's 2028 Global Village construction sets, which are core machines involved in civilization construction, which costs $50 million, but the value of all the services embodied in it is 11 trillion if you go through all the sectors that are covered by the machines. So that's 2028, and add 8 years to that. What is that? 2042. Um, the goal is actually very explicit. The entire technosphere is open source, meaning everything from computer chip designs to your TV to your tractor to your car to engines, rockets. It's open source, meaning, what's that mean? That companies that are developing that are using completely open IP. There are no patents. There's a collaborative effect where any single product now has shifted from being crappy to actually really good. And people might think, oh, products today are quite impressive and good. No, they're very crappy. They're made by hundreds of companies competing against each other, and I believe that does not yield the optimal product. And you can, to give you an example, a car fanatic or an engine fanatic will tell you that this engine is the best and there ain't no other. And 100 other people will tell you that about their engine. That means all of them suck. That's how you translate that. So that's just how it works in society today. So the campus. What is the grand vision? The grand vision is simply startup cities or settlements that don't suck, that are based on open collaboration where everything is open. But what you get by that is complete regenerative nature of enterprise, like no pollution and better human relations. So it's really about correcting all the systems that are there, including the infrastructures like banking or legal or economics, education, all these in health, all these institutions are transformed. So how do you get there? So the apprenticeship program, you're training to how to design and build anything, how to, so you're actually learning how to learn in a whole deep generalist sense. So deep generalist it's a thing. Look that up. Deep generalists, um, and you're literally learning the abundance mindset, and that's really how you develop humans, to be collaborative, open, integrated humans. Kind of like what Robert Heinlein had his quote about, who an integrated human is. But basically, the thing is, from the last 20 years, it's actually, we started building machines and houses. We transitioned to building enterprises, but the real transition right now, it's really about building humans. That's the real deal. So people who can achieve their full potential. And how do you do that? Well, first you got to solve material security. So yeah, the campus, yeah, it's going to have everything. It's going to have agriculture. It's going to have manufacturing. It's going to have education. It's going to be like a college campus, except for real. Like a college campus is a fake scene, right? It doesn't have a built-in economy. It takes resources from the outside to make it work, and it's beautiful and all that, and you get your Ivy League towers, but it's kind of relying on the same economy that's out there, which we're trying to transform. So we're saying, okay, let's start a campus. We're going to build it. Let's design everything here that doesn't suck. So how do we?
You imagine it being economically self-sufficient.
Yes,
So, like,
absolutely, absolutely. So with the Global Village construction set explicitly, we're talking about, with those machines in there, you're pretty much providing anything that you would get at Walmart or Amazon,
okay. Do
down
you
to things
imagine?
like, okay, so let's get specific on that. Like, well, let's not. Give me questions, because I can go on
Sorry,
and
yeah,
on.
I just wanna
Yeah.
I'm just trying to be mindful of your time
Yep.
because I'm trying to speed through a little bit some of the questions,
Yep.
but
Go
like
ahead.
more specifically, and also again, like at the end of this call, if there are specific details that you feel like we haven't covered or you feel like would you want to further represent, like feel free to send me
Yeah.
additional notes. You can also send follow-up questions for you to like
Yeah.
answer.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
More specifically, I'm curious, like for someone who maybe has a lot less, and obviously has a lot less information and a lot less background and like what you're doing here and what your vision is. I'm curious, like in the case where like you're growing food, you're having your own education system and all that. Like, will there still be like conventional, like anything resembling like conventional economy? Like, will
It's
there
going to
still
look
be?
exactly like the conventional economy, except it's going to look like an upscale neighborhood, or an eco-industrial park that's all fancy. It's going to look like a
But
fancy
on the
college
case of
campus.
like open source, right? Like you're
Yep.
talking about like lack of intellectual
Yep.
property,
Yep.
like lack of like this type of toxic competition.
Yeah.
How do you imagine people wanting to innovate in the case where they're not rewarded for their innovations the same way that IP allows them to?
Well, it's for. I mean, to give an example, like, okay, we'll train you to run the house business where you're making $5 million a year as a construction manager. That fits within the current model. There's nothing different. It's just that it's all open source.
So I guess like, but then wouldn't that require you to sell this? Is it just like you're just
We'll
selling
charge them for it.
services?
We're charged for a franchise or education.
Sorry, say that again.
What, like McDonald's? What do? They charge you for a franchise or for their training.
I guess like the franchise.
Franchise. Except it's
So
open source, meaning that the blueprints for everything about it are open. So anyone is actually encouraged to replicate. But there's huge learning curves. You're forgetting the thing that's implicit here is that this is not a walk in the park. This is rigorous education. This is professional school. This is a high level integrated learning curriculum that
mhm,
a lot of people are going to burn out initially.
for sure.
Hopefully not, but because we're trying to select for people with super grit and open collaborative mindset. But
For sure.
yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
I just, yeah, I want to make sure I understand. So
Yeah,
in
yeah.
this case, like in this, so then I'm sort of like, I'm using very stupid, like very
No,
like
just
rudimentary examples
yeah,
here. So like, let's
yeah,
say, I think with the tractor, let's say you're growing an apple tree, and then because you have all the materials that you need to grow an apple tree, you're selling the apples. And like through like these exchanges of goods and services and like the most rudimentary way of understanding
yeah,
economics, that's how you imagine this like society kind of functioning, like the same way
yeah,
that
yeah. I would
outside.
say yeah, exact. I mean, it functions exactly like the current society, except your costs of doing everything are like 10 times lower. So, for example, if you're a farmer, instead of spending your time paying off the machine, instead of lasting 5 years, lasts 50 years. So, therefore, your operating costs have gone way, way down. Or to give you another example, if when we develop, for example, solar hydrogen or even compressed biogas from digesters or plastic pyrolysis into fuel and diesel, then you can reduce the cost. Like, say we sell appliances that you throw plastic into it, and out the other end you turn a spigot and it spits out diesel, because plastic is essentially like fuels in disguise. You can build a machine to do that, right?
Okay. Okay. I
So
see.
now say an enterprise where fuel is like if you're a trucker, you buy one of these things. Now you're making, you say you make like $500,000 a year, but you have to pay $400,000 in fuel. Well, now you just paid maybe like $100,000 or $50,000 in fuel, so you're actually making, instead of 100K, you're making like 500K. That's how it works. It just means you run traditional enterprise, but you just make much more money, which means that you have to work less. And you shift to what the real deal is. It's to allowing people to pursue their passions, to do what they're supposed to, as opposed to trying to make a living. So it's
Okay.
basically
Cool.
cost reduction. That's the concept of the zero marginal cost society. Look that up. Definitely worth looking at. That's Jeremy Rifkin, who wrote about it. Included us in our book as an example of zero marginal cost efforts. But that's what it means. You're just doing business. However, you're doing it more efficiently. I mean, let me give you an example of the house. So the house, we still sell a regular house, except now, we're actually adding a PV system as a standard feature at no extra cost. Hey, that's because we're efficient and we're better. So, in other words, product quality increases on everything. So, for example, somebody builds an apartment complex. Now it looks like an upscale condo as opposed to the ghetto, because now they can do things at much more lower cost. Things like
Okay.
that.
I
It's
see.
just improving the quality of everything.
For sure. Okay, cool. With the time left, I would
Yeah.
love for us to dive slightly, like to dive into like how the recruitment processes looked like. So,
Yeah.
like, you mentioned someone actually reached out, being like, "When can I start?" How many people have signed up so far? And
So
of
far,
those, sorry, go ahead.
three, and then the idea here is that we're still waiting to get our, not waiting, but we got to get the website up. We just hired a branding company to redo our brand and do that. So we're actually getting a recruiting video up right now. So we're in the process of that and getting the website up. So for a clear, crystal clear message about this. So, but the apprenticeship, the way we're looking at it right now, is going to be basically 2-month quarters. Each quarter is going to start with, so every 2 months we're going to run a builder crash course. So we know we can attract people to that. It's a thing where you build a complete house from start to finish in 2 weeks, and then it's 900 square feet. It's a sophisticated house. It's not a piece of shit. It's a really good house and it looks beautiful. And you
Mhm.
go through absolutely every step of doing it. So we're going to do that for every quarter, and then um, do the 2 months after that. But
Could
basically,
you,
like, yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
would you be able to tell me anything about the three people who have signed up?
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
Um,
what are their backgrounds? Like, where are
so,
they
for
coming from?
example, the thing that we're concluding is this is really for career shifters, right? So, there's two career shifters that have signed up. One is a young career shifter who never went to college, decided, no, that's nonsense. I don't want to do the standard career track. I want innovation. I don't want to end up in a cubicle. That's kind of what I said. Like, when I graduated with a PhD in plasma physics, I said, I am not going into a cubicle. I'm going to try to do an experiment to rebuild the world. So there's innovative people out there that are not attracted to the standard career path. That's one. The second one is actually a 42-year-old woman who owns a salon, and she said, I want to build houses. And she actually visited the house that's for sale. She really liked it and was impressed by the modular build technique. So I haven't mentioned much about the modular build techniques, the modules we use, and the
Mhm.
sustainable aspects of it. And she loved it and said, I want to learn to build this. So that's two.
Would I be able to speak with her?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, I'll follow up requesting that. I think that would be really interesting.
I think she'd
I'm
love
really
to.
curious
So
about
yeah,
the career shifters.
yeah.
Um, okay, cool. That this is fabulous.
Mm-hmm.
I with Okay, and like there's a lot of information you already have about the apprenticeship online. So what I can do is like I'll read through those and then I'll ask you
Hmm.
more specific questions from there. I'm curious though, like you talk a lot about abundance mindset, and
Yes,
there's actually a book that recently came out by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson
indeed.
about abundance.
Yep.
I'm curious if you've read it, you disagree with it, like
Oh, I haven't read it. I'm actually
okay.
not clear about what the main concept is, but what I believe, I bet you, does it use the word open source in there anywhere? Open source hardware? I don't
Well,
know.
I'm halfway through it and it hasn't, but it talks a lot about the same themes that you're kind of saying. Like it's like we need to build more, but we need to build the right things is essentially like the what like the main pieces of the book so far.
Yeah, so I haven't read the book, but without reading it, I can give you a good impression what I think is going to be my review, and that is um, there's probably some scarcity thinking in it revolving around that we're in crisis. I do not believe we're in any sort of crisis from first principles. There's absolute abundance of energy and materials that can make prosperity at like a 10x affluence level for every single person on a planet, including those at the bottom of the pyramid. That's the physical reality that I'm very convinced happens on the earth. What's happened is an economic system and scarcity mindsets in people that act like resources are not available. So I bet you there's a little injection that, yeah, we've got these huge crises. I'm not denying any crisis. Yes, we are burning the earth up. And for example, with global warming, it's very likely to be real. And, we might change the climate to the point that it's like extinction, major extinction events. Sure, we can blow up the world with nukes any day, though life wouldn't cease. It would really suck, things like that. But like from first principles, if you just consider available resources, there's no such thing as scarcity, and I bet you this book says there's a lot of scarcity.
No, the book actually does the opposite. The book
It
starts
does.
off by saying we have everything we need. Which is why
Okay.
I
Oh,
brought it
that's
up.
great then.
I think you should like the book talks about how like we have everything we need and all
Okay.
that.
Yeah.
So far, I've only read halfway through,
Okay.
so
That's great.
I was curious as to were there anything like you were following them or like
I
I
didn't. I didn't even get to read it,
okay,
but
cool.
I
That's
should.
good to know. Like with the I'm curious if we can take a couple steps back, and I
Yeah.
want to make sure I fully understand like this economics and kind of like your vision here. And I know we've talked about it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in this like village that you're talking, or like, should I just call this project like the campus?
Yeah. Campus.
Okay,
So
like
we call it the OC campus. Yeah.
okay, like in the OC campus, um, you're talking about from what we spoke last time. You talked about like kind of people learning how to learn, people having more skills
Mm-hmm.
related to like
Mm-hmm.
sustaining like, a local community. You're talking about charter cities, um,
Mm-hmm.
with and like not to kind of beat the dead horse, but like with the talk of IP. Um, on
Mm-hmm.
the one hand, you're talking about how like through open source collaboration and like radical collaboration,
Yeah.
innovation can arise,
Yep.
right? And like maybe this is just me have like learn like going back on my basic economics, but it's
Yeah.
like with like innovation often is encouraged by competition, not necessarily like in a sense where okay, let me rephrase. So you're saying everyone will collaborate. I've been taught growing up, right,
Yeah.
like that you need to be incentivized to collaborate. Sorry, you need to be incentivized to innovate. Within this ecosystem that you talk about, where there is no IP law or there's no kind of protection against like, you developing a better product than someone else, how do you imagine people being incentivized to
I think
collaborate?
it boils down to personal evolution because incentive is really a lot about your self-esteem and how you feel about your own capacity, like what you want to do in your life. Everyone wants absolute power, let's say. Let's say I want absolute power. My sense of absolute power, which I do, I want absolute power to create an open source world. Like, hey, that sounds good to me. I think that the whole world could benefit when open access results for everything and people can unleash the potential of their lives. Another person might think of it, oh, well, okay, I need to make this completely proprietary to make it happen. I'm going to accumulate a lot of wealth. That's my power. Then I can control things. So there's different ways to do it. But I think in either way, one is material, the other one is like less material. It's more like, no, I want to create a world where I can learn all day long, or meditate all day long, or get along with people all day long, and create peace. Like there's different values. So I think people will cultivate values that are less about fear and scarcity, because like all this stuff about competition is based on a certain value system that says, oh yeah, we need to compete like that. And I would actually question like what you're saying about you're taught in school that competition is the way to go. I mean, I don't think so. You can read other treatments of the subject to like super cooperators. There's a book like that. There's other psychologists that talk about whether competition or collaboration has higher results.
Hmm.
From what I've read a lot of people that say that collaboration has significantly increased results. Now, so I would encourage you to really look at that critically and go to Chat GPT and ask them, well, what are the proponents of abundance and cooperation saying about this, and fight it out between the two. I bet
Hmm.
you're going to end up with cooperation. So
I'm
look into
wondering
that
if
more.
there
But
was.
it's one of those myths in society. Everyone teaches you that, oh yeah, you got to have that competition.
Yeah,
I don't think
no,
so.
this is great that you're saying this because I think my misunderstanding so far is coming from this like kind of crux that you just mentioned, kind of like does competition necessarily mean innovation? Does innovation necessarily need competition? I'm curious if there's specific examples that you personally like look up to. So like in cases like specific cities, specific social organizations, like situations where collaboration has really fueled innovation in a way that you admire.
I have seen no Wikipedia. I would say Wikipedia, ar- archive.org, those organizations of that nature. Um, Systematically, I'm not inspired by any effort, including there's elements of inspiration in things like there's the Fab Labs, there's charter cities, but each of these suffer from those elements that I described. For example, Fab Labs.
Is it
It's
FAB or
yeah,
is it
Fab Labs. Yes,
okay?
FAB.
Mhm.
I mean, very little about the Fab Labs is open source or product oriented, that you're actually developing open products. So that's a huge missed opportunity. Fab, Fab City or charter cities, yes, they talk about prosperity for all, but nowhere is there any explicit discussion that this will be open source. And I believe open source is critical to any kind of design like that. Any kind of regen this, regen that. Show me the open source designs of physical infrastructure that actually make it replicable and low cost. Very disappointing. I'm very disappointed in everything. I am encouraged by certain very point things like for example, our collaborators from Germany designed and built the world's first open source MRI machine that can scan a brain.
Did you send me information for that?
Yeah,
Okay, I'll make a list
that's
after.
absolutely inspiring. I'm thinking my father died of brain cancer. If he had this machine, maybe he could have seen this in time. Or think about all the countries that don't have any medical systems now get to modern age medical equipment that's designed for a lifetime. Oh, that's
Hmm.
sweet. That's exciting. That's super inspiring. But systems wise, um, there's also like a thing. Existential hope is a thing. So there is an organization. It's future. Uh, some I forget. I'll send you the link. But there's an exciting conversation happening around. Here's existential hope, because a lot of people are into the meta crisis theme, i.e., the world's going to end. Like I think most people are in that mindset. But there's also people that are no. Let's outside of the techno. Well, they're kind of techno utopian, but there's a healthy element of techno utopians called existential hope people. It's a thing. That's inspiring, I would say. So elements, yeah. Uh,
So
there's
this is
lots
great.
more.
I'll,
Yeah,
I'll make a bullet pointed list after we speak, and then you can follow up whenever you can, and then we can discuss further there.
yeah.
I'm curious, like, so far with the last 3 minutes, so far, um, has there been, are there been, sorry, has there been any kind of collaborators who contributed to your designs from start to finish, or not, so from start to now? Like, do you have any long-term collaborators
Um,
around?
yeah, there's some people like Tom Griffin, for example. Like, yeah, I mean, people from like Tom Griffin stands out as one guy who came in our early days. I think that was even like 2007. Still
Wow.
around. Yeah, there's some people. My
Would I,
wife, she's been around since a decade or so. You know, but for most people, it's the turnover is high because they get pissed off when it comes to hard work.
for sure.
No, I mean we never had any funding, right? Like no financial feedback loops until now, where we're starting
Mhm.
to do that. But that means you can't keep people around. You can't pay them.
For sure. And just, did you meet your wife through this, or is it,
I
if
met it.
she worked you
I
through?
met her through Open Hardware because I stalked her in an elevator when we met at the TED conference. So, and we started talking about open source. Uh, but no, she got into TED because of open source stuff, and I got in there because of open source stuff, and she's looking at me. And so you can say Open Hardware connected us, but we met actually at the TED conference because we both became TED fellows.
Oh, okay, amazing.
Yeah,
That's lovely.
yeah.
Okay, so to make sure, like, this is really, really, really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
To make sure I understand kind of um the crux of this sorry, OC campus is, on top of like the different, like we talked about open source, like, kind of the lack of collaboration, we talked about the lack of enterprise, specifically in the context of the OC campus. You're thinking about it as a place where everything can function normally as it does now, except everything is cheaper, affordable, like basic needs of survival are there. Um,
Yeah.
through all these like open source technologies, and people, like, you're imagining kind of this world where people's values change because they're no longer governed by the scarcity mindset,
Yeah.
such that innovation could come out, and like the nature of collaboration and, I guess, like humanity within this campus would change just because um, there's a switch in not thinking that things are scarce anymore.
Yeah, but you have to, yes, but you have to deliver that by showing that. So here's we're showing how, okay, open source techniques get us to build a modern standard of living, abstractly speaking, and therefore when you can, but so the thing is, the goal for the 4 years in the program is to teach an abundance mindset, but an abundance mindset must be backed by extreme productivity and skill sets, because otherwise something's going to scare you and you're going to revert back to the reptilian brain. So you have to build up a skill set, but you also have to work on your psychology. So it's a lot about personal development of character and
Okay.
inner soft skills. So this is about transforming human psychology, like literally rewiring the brain over a long time, over millions of years, to actually live the abundance mindset and practice that every day. That's not happening yet. I mean, human minds haven't caught up. Like the evolution has not caught up to modern technology, right? Like we're still in a scarcity mindset, like we were 10,000 years ago, where the threats were real. Now the threats are not real.
For
There's
sure.
absolute abundance. Like productivity of the earth is insane, to the point that you have marketing to try to unload all the excess productivity.
For sure. Amazing. Okay. This has been really, really helpful. I think you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned a couple people I would love to speak with if possible.
Yeah,
So I'll
yeah, we'll
follow
do.
up with like a list of those, and I'll also follow up with kind of like certain points that you hit that I would love to learn a little bit more about, like examples. Yeah, this has been really helpful. And again, if you feel like, sorry, and I didn't mean to kind of cut you off through the second half of our conversation. I just want to make sure I get some of the
Yeah,
questions
yeah.
in. If you feel like there's any sort of like ideas that you felt that you weren't able to express within our time today, feel free to just drop me a note, and
Mm-hmm.
then I'll make sure to include that in background when I'm writing the article. So, and as for the timelines, this piece is supposed to come out in December, November, December. I don't know exactly when the publication date is, um, but as we like with features, and this is a feature, this piece is a feature. It's like probably going to be like 2,500, 3,000 words long. I typically like to maintain a relationship with my sources, such that like if I write something and it's like because we're talking about a very technical subject, I want to make sure you get an opportunity to fact check whether or not what I'm writing is accurate and representative of what you had in mind.
Yeah,
So is
definitely.
that okay if I periodically send you emails? That's what I'm
Yeah, yeah,
trying to say.
definitely. This no, this is. I think this will be great. MIT Technology Review is that?
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
MIT Technology Review.
So that's
I
worth it.
believe.
That's good. That's worth it. That's a high level audience.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. This has been lovely, and I'll send you an email shortly after.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for following up. We'll be in
Of
touch. Feel
course,
free to
good
send me all
speaking
the
with
questions.
you. Thank you.
Okay.
Have a good
Have a
day.
good day. Thank you. Bye bye.